Okay, so here is a review of ecology, starting with characteristics of life, going all the way to food chains, food webs, and energy pyramids. So let's start with the characteristics of life. All living things have to have these 8 qualities in order to be considered alive. So all living things are made of cells. Bacteria, algae, they are unicellular, they're only made of one cell. Humans, plants, animals, most fungi are multicellular, they're made of many cells. All living things reproduce. They have to be able to reproduce offspring or children in order to be considered alive. All living things have DNA. This is genetic information. This is how those traits are passed on from generation to generation when they are reproducing. All living things grow and develop. They have a lifespan and mature over time. So if you think of a plant, they start as a seed and then they can grow into a tree or some sort of bigger plant. It doesn't stay the same size and it just matures over time. Eventually, the plant will likely die. The same thing goes with humans. Babies are not the same size as high schoolers. High schoolers generally aren't the same size, shape as a 60-year-old. All living things obtain and use energy. So it depends on how they get their energy is how we classify them. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But plants and algae get energy from the sun. Animals and fungi get energy from eating food. All living things respond to stimuli. So a stimulus is something that triggers a response. So at the end of class, when the bell rings, that would be a stimulus. And your response is that you get up and you leave the room. All living things maintain homeostasis. So all living things like to keep a relatively constant internal environment in their bodies. So humans, for example, we like to keep our temperature around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. We also like to try and keep our sugar levels consistent. We like to keep our heart rate relatively consistent. And even if it goes outside of those norms, it eventually comes back to our normal, constant setting. And lastly, all living things evolve and adapt. Now, this is looking at the species as a whole. So if you were looking at humans as a whole, humans 2,000 years ago are different than the humans today, just slightly. We're better suited for our environments, but it also depends on years and years and years of reproduction and evolving and adapting. The same thing goes for any living thing. Bacteria can do this in a matter of months to years, but most things, animals, plants, take hundreds, if not thousands of years to evolve and adapt to their environment. So if something has all of these characteristics of life, we can call them biotic or living. If they do not have all of those characteristics of life, they are considered abiotic or non-living. Now, keep in mind that non-living means it was never living. So, some examples of biotic factors include plants, animals, bacteria, humans, fungi like mushrooms. Some examples of abiotic factors include clouds, temperature, fire, water, which can be in the form of liquid or snow, so solid or ice, rocks, and then soil or dirt. Next we get to the water cycle, so we're going to focus on the abiotic for a little bit. So in this diagram, we can see that there is, and we're going to start all the way on the left, evaporation. So evaporation is when liquid water turns into water vapor from bodies of water. So whether it's from a lake, an ocean, a river, evaporation is when liquid water turns into water vapor and is then in the environment, in the air. Eventually, that water vapor cools down and turns into liquid droplets and it forms clouds. This is condensation. So the formation of clouds is condensation. Eventually, gravity pulls the liquid water and it falls to the earth as rain, sleet, or snow. This is called precipitation. So rain, sleet, or snow is precipitation. Last but not least in this diagram, we have transpiration. Now, transpiration is the evaporation of water from plant leaves through these special openings called stomata. So it is still a liquid water evaporating out of plant leaves, so turning into water vapor, but it is specifically from plants. Next, we have the carbon cycle. So the diagram here shows a lot of different things that go on in the carbon cycle, but I would like to focus on the fact that carbon dioxide is found in the air, the atmosphere, and there are different processes that can remove or add carbon dioxide. So photosynthesis, which is what plants do, and algae, it removes carbon dioxide. So you can see the arrow goes into the tree for photosynthesis, and that carbon dioxide goes in. So photosynthesis removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. On the other side of the diagram is combustion of fossil fuels. Burning coal, oil, or gas adds carbon dioxide to the environment because those things are made largely of carbon, and when you heat them up, it breaks it down into these smaller molecules. Additionally, plants and animals do respiration, which means they break down food, usually in the form of sugar, and then one of the waste products from the sugar is carbon dioxide. So when we breathe out, for example, as humans, we breathe out carbon dioxide. This respiration adds carbon dioxide to the atmosphere or the environment. Plants also let out carbon dioxide, but they also do let out oxygen. We'll talk about that later. All right, so we talked about the abiotic. Let's talk about some biotic factors. So first is the vocabulary. Producers. They are also called autotrophs, and they get their energy from the sun to make their own food during photosynthesis. Examples of these include plants and algae. Consumers, on the other hand, are called heterotrophs. They have to eat or consume food to get energy. Examples include herbivores, which eat plants, omnivores, which eat plants and meat, carnivores, which eat meat only, and decomposers, which eat decaying organisms. So examples of herbivores could be rabbits, grasshoppers, bees, something that only eats plant or plant parts. So bees get pollen and nectar from flowers, therefore they are herbivores. Omnivores are humans. We eat plants and meat. Same thing about bears, raccoons. A lot of things are actually omnivores. Mice are also omnivores. Carnivores eat meat only. So sharks, lions, think those top apex predators in ecosystems. And then decomposers eat dead or decaying things. This is often like your fungus, bacteria, earthworms. They're breaking down dead things. All right, now that we have that information, we can look at some food chains. So food chains takes feeding relationships in an ecosystem and puts them into a level of organization. So we always start in a food chain with a producer, and such as grass, and then we put the thing that eats the grass next in line. And notice how the arrow points to the thing that's doing the eating. And this is because it's getting that energy from the thing before it. So it wouldn't make sense to put the arrows towards grass. It only makes sense to point it to grasshoppers, because grass doesn't get energy from grasshoppers. That would be weird. Grass gets energy from the sun. Grasshoppers, though, get energy from grass. So that arrow has to point towards the grasshopper. These grasshoppers are herbivores, but they are also considered primary consumers because they are the first consumer in the food chain. A secondary consumer would be the second consumer in the food chain, such as this frog. So the frog eats the grasshopper, and notice again the arrow points to the thing doing the eating. This frog in this food chain would be considered a carnivore because it's eating another animal. Then we have a python. Again, it's a carnivore because it's eating another animal, but it's the third consumer, the tertiary consumer in this food chain. Last but not least, we have a quaternary consumer, which is this eagle, which would eat the python. The quaternary consumer is just a fourth consumer in the food chain. Now, here's where it can be a little confusing. You also have trophic levels. So trophic levels just means what step in the food chain they are. So producers are always in trophic level 1. If it does photosynthesis, it gets its energy from the sun, it is in trophic level 1. Trophic level 2 is whatever eats that plant. So in this one, it's this primary consumer, which is the grasshopper. In trophic level 3, we have the frog, but the frog is a secondary consumer. And then so on and so forth. The python's in trophic level 4, the eagle's in trophic level 5. The arrows in a food chain show the flow of energy. The arrows in a food web also show this, and they point in the direction of what is doing the eating. Multiple food chains make up a food web. So here's an example of a food web. The food web has this phytoplankton, and the phytoplankton can be eaten by the krill, which are eaten by the blue whale. That is one food chain in this food web. Another food chain in this food web could be phytoplankton to zooplankton to fish to seagull to seal and to orca. It's quite a longer food chain, but it is still a food chain in this ecosystem. Again, note that the arrows point to the thing doing the eating. Now, energy pyramids are just another way to model energy flow in an ecosystem. So it's just like a food chain or a food web. But these also model the 10% rule. So the bottom of the pyramid is the largest. This is where the most energy is, and this is where your producers are found. So in the 10% rule, only 10% of energy from one level moves to the next. The rest is lost as heat. So if we start off with 64,000 units of energy in trophic level 1, in trophic level 2, where the caterpillars are, we'll only have 6,400. That means in trophic level 3, where the mice are, you would only have 640 units. And then in trophic level 4, where the owls are, it's 64 units. Again, that energy decreases as it goes up the energy pyramid or up the food chain because the rest of that energy is lost as heat. So that is a summary of everything from characteristics of life all the way through energy pyramids.